You are very welcome, everybody. Can everybody hear me loud and clear? That's brilliant. It's a very exciting time for me. I'm delighted to have this wonderful opportunity to have a conversation with this beautiful woman, Amantha Murphy, a dear friend, a woman who's very close to my heart, but also an extremely knowledgeable woman, as I'm sure you will find out soon enough. Still people coming in. So we are going to talk about many things today, but mainly we're going to talk about Amantha's new book. Now I'm going to hold this up to the screen. It will be back to front, so don't panic in case you're wondering if you can't read mirror writing. The book is called The Way of the Seabhean, okay, which is it's an Irish shamanic path, is the subheading. And it is about the wise woman, the old woman, or the seer in the community. And it harks back to our Celtic heritage for those of us from the Celtic. Still people coming in there. Just bear with me. Now, so with that in mind, remember, half hour for questions and answers at the end. Don't forget to raise your blue hand or to raise your hand on screen or wave frantically at the screen if you want to, and then I should be able to see you. Um, what you have an option of doing at the top right hand section of your computer screen, although it may be somewhere else, you will have speaker view or gallery view. Now, if you don't want to be looking at everybody else's face, which you may well want to, you can put it onto speaker view, which means that as Samantha is talking, you will have the benefit of seeing her beautiful face and listening to what she has to say. So, with that in mind, we are here to talk about the way of the Shivan. So, I'm probably saying that incorrectly from your perspective, Amantha, but could you please enlighten us just on a very basic level for those people who have not had the opportunity yet to buy the book or to explain how you came about this journey?
The journey of the book itself.
Yes.
Um, well, I started my own work really publicly around the age of 20. I grew up talking to spirit. Spirit for me was the real world. And it wasn't until the age of 12 when I had an eye operation for double vision, that I actually started integrating into the world as we know it today. Before that, this reality for me was a place I had to pretend to be like everybody else and knew that I never was. And so after the age of 12, I came very much into this reality. And then around the age of 16, I started opening up again through an experience at school with the world of spirit. And so by the time I was 20, I was working as a clairvoyant. And I actually started my work through the Spiritual Union church in England. I was working through the churches there. And then I went on, continued to develop in other ways. And my love always has been the land of Ireland. Every year I'd come home to my granny here where I am now on this land, and she would take us out to talk to the fairies and leave gifts and attune with the stone people. And she very much had the balance of the old ways and a very loose type of Catholicism, not the type of Catholicism that my mother had, which was very, very structured and full of fear. My granny's was very, very loose. So like one Sunday morning, she came in from feeding the chickens and my mother said to her, "Mother, you're not ready for mass, you're not dressed." And my granny said, "Oh, sure, God knows I'm busy," and it was the way she had her religion. It was like God knew she was busy. That in itself was a prayer. What she did, everything she did, was the prayer, life itself. And she used to tell us when we were young, don't pray to Jesus if you want anything. Pray to the mother, because she's the mother and she's the one who will get it for you. And so I very much grew up under the auspices of Mary as the mother. And at the age of 7, I was in the Children of Mary, which is something in the Catholic tradition where you wear white and blue and you carry the statue of Mary around at Maytime and sing songs, and quite a pagan tradition, as you probably know. And so that tradition held me a lot more than the Catholicism, and Jesus always seemed to be something outside of my realm that I didn't really know about and I wasn't interested in really. It was the mother. And the land here was for me the great mother. coming back as a child every year from Kilburn in London, I would run out into the field and I would open up my arms and I'd open my legs and lie in the field. And I would just lie there and breathe. And very gradually, I'd become the field. And then I'd become the hill that I live on. And then my energy would go way down into the valley, into Beaufort, and up into the mountains. And I could feel my chest opening as this was happening. And for the first time, I could feel myself really breathing. And then she would come to me, this ancient, ancient woman would come to me and she would talk to me. And as a child, a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old child, I felt quite guilty that I thought of her as my mother and not my own mother, who was a very, very good woman, very hardworking, and literally did everything she could to make sure that my brother and I could go on holiday with the school or come back to my granny every year. But this was my energy, this was my old woman. And as I grew older, she was always there for me. At the age of 16, she said to me that I couldn't stay here. My focus at that point was to leave school when I could, come back and live with my granny and take over here. My granny was a local midwife and healer. And it was all I ever wanted, was to be like my grandmother. My grandmother was 4'2" in height, very slender with silvery white hair. And my mother was 4'6". So at 5'2", I'm actually quite tall in the family. And luckily, two of my 3 girls are taller than I am. But and so she told me I had to leave at 16, and leave I did. It was very, very difficult, but I did. And so I went on, I developed clairvoyance. I started doing different forms of healing, running development groups. And I learned very quickly that my focus of intention was more the spiritual than the psychic. I had gone to school with nuns, and I was very blessed in that the nuns I went to school with were very good women, very kind women. And they had an orphanage. They actually had 2 orphanages, and they had a home for the deaf and dumb and the place for tramps in London. And the school, St. Vincent's, was right by Westminster Cathedral. And I used to work with them at weekends, and I loved these nuns. I had never met women who were so kind and spiritual. And the very first medium I met wasn't like that at all. She was very psychic, but had no kindness in her. And I realized afterwards that if I was drawn to anything, it was to the spirituality of the nuns. But I didn't want to be a nun. I mean, my sexual energies had started rising, and I moved away from the thoughts of being a nun. And so as I developed, I began to really blend the two together, the spirituality and the psychic ability. And that's what drew me really to the church, the Spiritual Union Church, because they very much balance that. And of course, I then continued on. I was doing other things as well, like astrology and esoteric astrology. And then I met my second husband, who was working with technologies that were innovative, ecologically enhancing, that he was trying to finance to get into the third world. And I started working with him and working with the technicians and scientists. And I started using my ability with their technologies. So I could actually go into the machinery and see how blades should be cut, and how things would move, and what symbols needed to be where to create vibration and sound. And it was a very exciting time for me. A lot of my energy went into that. And my first book is about the channeling that came through at the time from Spirit for us, because we lived in community, which was a huge learning curve for all of us being in community. And Spirit had given us the doctrine of truth, love, and harmlessness. To live in truth, to live with love, to live harmlessly, to speak with truth, to speak with love, to speak harmlessly, to act with truth, to act with love, to act harmlessly. And at the time, I was around 30, 31, I didn't understand why truth came before love. But within months, I began to see it, I began to experience it, and I began to realize that sometimes we do things that we think is for love, but actually we just don't want to deal with certain issues. We don't necessarily want to face other people's irritation or, whatever you're going to get as a comeback. And so truth had to be first. And it began to strip away a lot of the illusions for me and began to bring me very much back into that place, into that space that I had as a child, being in that space of connectedness. And that began to draw me back again to Ireland. I was going up to a place called Findhorn at the time in the north of Scotland, which was a community, a spiritual community, and I knew Eileen Caddy, one of the people who started it, and I met a young man there that when I met him, I actually decided that I thought he wasn't quite au fait, you know, I was going to keep away from him. He was a little kind of crazy. I guess he was a bit crazy. And so I thought, well, I'll keep away from that fella. And, but to my surprise, 2 or 3 weeks after I came home, he came and visited the community and he stayed with us for a while. And he was adopted by the Hopi Indians, by Grandfather David, who was the spiritual head of the Hopis. And he'd been sent to see the Dalai Lama and to bring gifts to the Dalai Lama, because the Hopis and the Dalai Lama and the Buddhists have certain things in common. And so Robert stayed with us for about 6 weeks. Then 6 months later, he stayed with us for about 3 months. We ended up having to kind of push him out a bit, you know. And then Robert used to write to me every week, which was lovely. And I, to my surprise, would write back with him, even with my dyslexia. And then he stopped writing. And so I was in America the following year and I visited the Hopi reservation and we stayed there for about 3 weeks. And I found out that Robert had died. He'd got some chest infection that had turned septic and he had died very quickly. But this very old native woman came up to me and she was only about my granny's height. And she looked up into my eyes and she said, "Why are you here? You carry your people's stories. You carry your people's messages, your people's wisdom and mysteries." And it shocked me into the realization that I need to go home again. I need to come back. And so I started coming back to Ireland again then, and I started bringing my children. And then when I was going through my second divorce, I came back for a week on my own. And I'm lying in the fields one evening and she comes to me, this ancient woman comes and she says to me, "It's time to come home." And within 3 months, I had moved back with my 2 youngest, my 2 older ones. One was gone to university and the other one decided to take a year off before she went to university and took a job in Killarney. And so she stayed there and then I had my other 2 with me. And so I started moving very much back into the land, and I'd already started doing pilgrimages in Ireland from 1995. So I've been back since 97. And then my mother, she got cancer when my youngest was born. So that's 31 years ago now. And I saw it. She asked me for a healing, which I thought was quite incredible for a little Irish Catholic woman. She asked me for a healing. My father had died many years before that. And I did the healing and I saw this growth in her colon. And I told her to go to the doctor and ask for colonoscopy. And my mother was a very, very shy, very private, very quiet woman. And I could see she felt a bit mortified. And I said to her, "Mama, I'll come with you." And she went, no. So she went. And afterwards she said, "Oh, the doctor said just to eat more fiber." And I said, "Did you tell him exactly?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Mama, if you don't go back, I will ring him myself." And she knew I would, so she went back. So anyway, subsequently, they found it was a polyp that had become malignant. And they removed it. And I brought her back to us when she always thought the community was rather strange until she lived with us for a while. And then I had to kind of push her out too after 3 months. I think she really loved it because the men would sit down with her and watch football. She loved football and she loved to make white sauce on a Sunday, and everybody would also tell her how lovely it was. And the grandchildren would come in the evenings from school and sit and do their homework and chat to her. And of course, she just loved that community sense. I mean, she came from community. You know, tribal people. You grew up with your brothers and sisters and cousins. And so I think she missed that. But then 12 years later, when I was living here, she caught it again. And this time the cancer was all over. And so I brought her home and she lived with us and she died with us, which was lovely. It was a very powerful time to be with her and to go through that ritual, that rite of passage with her. And then afterwards, it was my 50th birthday, and I had a big party to celebrate. I actually ended up being 50 for 2 years in a row. I missed 51 because I enjoyed my 50th so much. I decided to be 50 the following year as well. So I had this big party, and everybody at one point made a circle and had me in the middle, and they were dancing and singing around me. And I just felt so strongly that I didn't want this information to be gone again. That when I die, I didn't want this to go underground again. That this is here, it's in me, it's in my bones. This information is in my blood, it flows through me, and it comes to me through my foremothers. And I didn't want this to be forgotten again. And so that was the point. And that's what, nearly 19 years ago now, that I felt I need to do something. I need to put this down. I need to write this book. And some of you who are on have known me for a long, long time. And you know that I've talked about this for a long time. And I'm dyslexic. At school in the 50s, they didn't know about dyslexia. I had my first prize for good mental work at the age of 5. I was top of the class all the way through for mathematics, but can't spell to save my life. My writing's dreadful. I can't learn from books. I share with me a story and I won't forget it, but I can't pick up from books. And so after many years of talking about it, I realized I wasn't going to do this. I was not going to write this down. So I started recording my workshops with the permission of the people in the workshop. And then Orla, who is a very dear friend, and Orla and I used to be on a committee for a weekend, not-for-profit weekend called the Wise Woman Weekend, that we used to hold in Ireland yearly. And Orla is an author. And I asked Orla, she came to a workshop I was doing at the Wise Women Weekend. And I was actually doing a workshop that was weaving together stories, the myths of the goddesses with chanting and dancing. And Orla came up to me afterwards and she said, Amantha, you have to record your stories. You have to record them. And I said, well, actually, Orla, I have this book that needs to be written first. And so she thought, oh, yeah, sure. She said, that'll take 18 months. So that's 18 months to be done, you know. So 4.5 years later, it was completed. And it's taken a long time. And it was cut a great deal. There was 125,000 words. And the publishers cut it to 70,000, which I felt grief over. And then I just let go. I said, whatever is meant to be will be. And I can maybe make some handbooks of the information that wasn't put in. So that's how it came about. That's how the book came about, long story short. But I've been teaching this work since before 2000, the year 2000. I teach it mainly to women. I have 2 groups in America where there are men, beautiful men in it. And I find that when I work with women, it creates a space. And I truly believe that when women come together, magic happens. When women come together, spirituality grows. It's something that is natural, and I've seen this again and again over the years. I don't know if any of you heard or remember is it Greenham Common that we had in England when the Americans came and started living in a base in Wiltshire, and a lot of women went down and camped around the base to try and stop them. And in the community, we were gathering food and clothes weekly, and one of us would go down with that. And the women that were going there were fighting for the earth. They had no idea about spirituality in the way that we would think about it. They were much more politically minded. And from them, I learned that actually, as a woman, the earth is part of my politics. And they learned because as women, they began to open up spiritually with each other. They began to share on a deeper level. They began to be there and hold each other on a deeper level. And magic happened. And it was quite amazing to see that happen. And so when women come together, magic does happen. And the ability to hold space for other women, the ability to allow a woman to feel that space and to know that that is a sacred space. Nothing will be carried from this space. Everything will be held. Everything is sacred, and that we can be there with you. We can cry with you. We can laugh with you. We can roar with you. We can dance with you. We can keen with you. You know, it really feeds us. And through feeding us, we find the inner essence of who we are, the magnificence of who we are in our power, in our passion, and in our grace. And that
Yes.
magnificence then begins to rise. It begins to show itself through us. And that really is very much a part of the way of the Seabhean, which is a balancing of women's mysteries, rituals, and rites of passage, and what I see as ancient Irish traditions, which are very linked in with the shamanic path. And we use the word shamanic because it explains how we work. It explains that we work on three different levels: the lower, the middle, and the upper worlds. And this is something that's indigenous, not to us, but actually to people all over the world. When you go back to the tribal people of the world, their similarities are so much more than their differences in their beliefs and in their rituals. And it's the same for us. I had no physical teacher for this. It was the ancient ones, the stone people. It was the ancestors, my ancestors. It was the foremothers. It was the Tuatha Danann, the stone people. They all came to me, and they gifted me words and visions and ways of being that allowed me to integrate this work into a weave of what I see as a chalice that I hold that others can drink from. And as they drink from the chalice, it awakens that within themselves. And so they begin to find their strength, they begin to find their magic, they begin to find their power and passion and grace. And we hold space, or I hold space for that.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Um, could I bring you back to something that you said, which was I felt very powerful in terms when you were speaking initially about your mother.
Yes,
How the difference between your grandmother's generation and your mother's generation.
yes,
And it was quite significant, I think, that she started to lose her voice, that she felt her power somewhat had been diminished. This a bit lack of ability to stand in her power,
yes,
that had been stripped away through the power over, if you pardon the expression, the power of the society that she lived in, or the time that she grew up in, which is not, unusual for the 50s and 60s, and particularly for the Irish community when they moved, particularly to Britain. But that sense of not having a voice to articulate their sense of identity,
mm,
which seem to have come full circle. So would you say that this is really an act of remembering the
absolutely.
power?
Yes, absolutely. An act of remembering. And remember, to remember is to reweave.
Wow.
It's bringing this forth again. You know, my mother was born in the early 1920s. And so she came in, she was 1925. We became a union in 23. And Catholicism came in at that point. They saw this as an opportunity to make it a Roman Catholic country. And so it was a very different type of experience that she had than the generation before her.
Yes. So
Yeah,
that loss of voice, for want of a better word, and not even so much in the verbal aspect of it, but the ability that she had presence, because everything passed to the man under that, rule of
outside the house.
Catholicism. Outside, yeah, exactly, outside the house.
Not
Yes,
inside
absolutely,
the house, but outside the house.
outside the
Yeah.
house. Yeah,
Yeah, woman's power in Ireland has often always been inside the house.
yeah.
And it was inside the house. She ruled the house. There's no mistake. But she was quiet and demure outside the house. Yeah, yeah,
But so inside the house, then just on a broader scale, if we looked at that sense of community that you had spoken about, that women, when they come together, this sense of
yes,
community, which is very different to uh, how would I put it, a male or patriarchal view of the world, which, you know, I think we've just come through on a global scale, particularly in the Western world. There's been quite a lot of that. So this ability for women to come together and that reintegration of shared voices, so it becomes power with as a power as opposed to power over. So it's a shared experience.
Yes.
At what point would you say that helped in the recovery? Because reading through this book, the recovery of some of these lost or unknown goddesses was absolutely fascinating. So, you know, obviously we have the likes of Bridget, who's well known, or Maeve, but these other ones like Bohan, you know, Talta, um, I can't say that one, Chocta,
Doctor,
Chocta,
doctor, yeah.
incredibly important, you know, energies in women that prior to this book would completely have been forgotten. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about those.
Um, for me, what happened with the deities is I would often be drawn to a place. I'd be driving along and I'd be pulled to a place. I'd feel that pull, I'd feel that draw. And so I'd turn off the road and I'd follow the draw. I'd go down and it might look like a boreen that I'm going up, and then there might be a fork, and I keep following it. And then I'll find myself somewhere where I feel like I am in the space betwixt and between. It's suddenly a stillness. You might hear the birds, you might hear the rustling of the grass, and you might hear nothing, but you can feel that this is a sacred space, this is a different space. And so I would always ask permission to move into this space. And then I wait. I open and I wait to see what is there, who is there, and if they're willing to share. And so for Clutter, for example, she came to me way before I knew where she came from. And she came to me as a raven. And I was quite taken back by it. You know, my aunt Nell had died the year before, and Nell loved to go up to this special well in Ballyhaig. And we would do it as a pilgrimage every year. And when I come home, I'd drive her up. And so I decided to do that when I came home in honor of my Auntie Nell. And I went up to the well and I blessed myself with water, and I sat and I prayed. And then I went, it was a beautiful day, so I bought an ice cream and went and sat on the beach. And I'm sitting there with my 99, you know, the 99s
Yes,
with
yeah.
the chocolate inside it, you know, like licking my ice cream. And this huge raven comes onto the sand and stares at me and starts walking towards me. And I'm thinking, oh, you know, so I break off a little bit of the wafer and I throw it as far as I can. And it goes off and catches the wafer and comes back. And this continues to happen until it's literally standing by my feet. And I'm feeling, you know, completely taken back by this and a little unnerved as well, because I mean, ravens can be big birds. And so I stood up quite quickly. I didn't give it any more of my ice cream or wafer. And I went off and I drove home. And that night I had a bath, and in the bath, words came to me. She calls to me and I answer. She sings to me and I speak her words. And it continued on. And then I went to bed, and the next morning I was woken up with this. Can you hear that? This knock, knock, knocking on my window. And I opened my eyes and I looked at the clock, and it was 5:30 in the morning. And I thought, well, maybe some cattle have got out. My cousin's cattle might have got out, and maybe they're on the lawn. So I got up and I opened the curtains, and sitting outside the window on the ledge was the raven knocking at my window. And I thought, too much, too much. I'm on my own. I'm thinking, oh, you know. So I sat down with that and I opened myself and I journeyed into that. I journeyed into the space between Raven and I, that place betwixt and between, and where the veil is thin, you know. And I moved into that space, and then she came to me, Clutter, and she told me who she was, and she never gave me her name at that point, but she told me that she was the keeper of the gate between the worlds, and it is to her we go. And She carries a light, and I had this very deep journey with her that stayed with me all my life, stayed with me ever since. And actually, Helen, the artist, painted it for me.
Oh, she's fabulous, Helen, isn't she?
Yeah, absolutely fabulous. And then I got in the car and she took me to where she used to live, which is on Valencia. It's an island off of the Ring of Kerry, down outside of Seabhean. And then I started asking locally, did they know of any deities that had lived on that island? And, this is like 96, 97, 1996, 97. And nobody really knew. And so an older woman, an elder, I call her an elder, Eileen, who's nearly in her 90s now. I asked Eileen, because I knew that Eileen as a child had lived down near there. She'd lived near Port Magee. And so Eileen actually went down and started talking to people. And she came back to me with the name. And she said, Clucta, and she's the daughter of Mogroth. And Mogroth lived on that island. And he was the first magician that we knew of in Ireland. And as soon as she said the name, it hit me. It was like my whole body just shook inside. And I knew this was Clucta. And so I started journeying with Clucta. I started working with Clucta. And of course, then within 3 years, my mother was diagnosed with cancer the second time. And I had my journey with my mother for the 8 months. And so I really felt the Clucta was introducing me into that work.
Yeah. And so when you had written in the book about when the raven had came, initially
Yes.
you had a fear of death because they would normally be associated with death.
Yes.
And then obviously the relationship with Clocta has become to it's like a rebirth. It's not necessarily the end of something, but the beginning of something new.
Yes, it's the ending of things. And it's how important it is for us to honor endings, how important it is for us to have closures.
Yeah.
And, when we look at the wheel, the eightfold wheel, Samhain is Clucta in the northwest. And then we have the north, which is the Cailleach. And this is the place of rest and respite, and how important it is to have rest after completion, whether it's the completion of a relationship, the completion of a job.
Yes.
How important it is. And also if we had a death in the family or with our friends or whatever, how important it is to have that time of rest and reflection before we move towards Bridget, before we move towards Imbolc, which is the place of birth. And so she really started me on that journey of recognizing how important it is to honor those turnings that have been in Ireland for thousands of years, and
Yes.
to bring that back consciously into my life again.
It's very powerful for women in particular, because as the world has moved, this or the ability to rest is kind of somewhat being removed, because we're told to be productive and keep going. And traditionally would, because actually in the north of Scotland there's a very famous place for the Cailleach as well. I'm not quite sure where in Scotland, but maybe somebody there could let me know later on. But I know in the very north of Scotland there's a powerful place too for the Cailleach as well. So with the remembering of these other goddesses, could you talk about the other ones, the lesser known ones, aside from Clocta, if you talk about Bohan and Teltu as well?
Yes, Bohan is Bohan and Macha, which sit in the east and the west respectively, are both very, very ancient deities in the story of Ireland. They go way back, even beyond the Tuatha, beyond the Firbolgs. And it's said that when the world was moving from liquid and gas into solid form, Bohan brought down the Milky Way through her breasts. And it flowed through her breasts and it became a river. And the river is called the River Boyne in honor of Bohan. And Bo, of course, in Irish is cow.
Yes.
So some would see her as a cow goddess. And so she connects Brunaboyna. She connects Newgrange, Nath and Douth, which we know now are great places of ritual in Ireland. For over 5,000 years, the midwinter sun rises and comes up and moves through the lentil and lights up the inner chamber of Brunaboyne. It lights up the triple spiral that is in there. And that's been happening for over 5,000 years. Imagine Christ is 2,000 years. This has been
Yeah,
happening for 5,000 years. And so she is connected to water, Boaz. And of course, our bodies as well are made up of over 70% water. And water is our emotions, our feelings, and our instincts. And how important it is for us to feel, how important it is for us to allow ourselves to feel, to allow ourselves to be in touch with, not to be cut off from. You know, in some of the older, and I say older in relation to where we are now, in some of the religions, nothing was below the belly button. In the matriarchal and matrifocal religions, everything is sacred, especially the sacred act of love. And so, you know, that water, the water that lies within us, how do we replenish ourselves? How do we drink from our own wells? Because, like you said earlier, with my mother's voice closing down, you know, she was a very private woman by nature, but she was not drinking from her well. And when we drink from our well, when we can replenish ourselves with all that we are, with all that we carry, then the rivers of life flow through us. And we are meant to eat and drink of life. You know, the people of Ireland have always wanted to eat and drink of life. They used to work to live. And that was only up until 40 years ago, you know, and even less down in Kerry and other places. But now, unfortunately, it's moving to that you have to work, you know, you have to live to work, you know.
exactly. Yeah.
And it's very different now. But the whole idea of literally being in the moment, drinking from your well, feeding yourself all that you need, and recognizing the fullness of that, and the water that she brings, because it's in the east, it's to awaken us to our dream time. What did we dream of when we were young girls? Did we have a youth? Did we play as children? You know, and can we play now? Can we bring that back into our lives? It's a part of who we are. You know, sometimes we can get so intense and caught up with life that we forget to play. We
Yeah,
forget to have
exactly.
fun. We forget to laugh, you know. And so she brings us back to that again. And she brings us back to the awareness of our dream time and how we can use our dream time to create our reality.
And so, would you recommend that? Because I would imagine that there's a lot of women, and possibly male men too, but a lot of who may not necessarily know how to remember,
Yeah.
how to find that space of connection. So, is this book a way to remember, or is it a pathway to remembering?
It's the beginnings of it.
Fantastic.
I see all of the work and all of the teachings as ways of remembering within yourself, awakening the memories that each person holds. And so the book begins the process of helping you to reclaim yourself, helping you to remember who you are and what you carry.
Wow. And then, so the
Nobody
other,
can do it for you. No one is supposed to do it for you. We are here to live in the entirety of our nature. We are here to live as human beings, beings in human form. And in this time now, more than any other up till now, we have a responsibility to be all that we are meant to be, live all that we are meant to live. We are meant to be fully cognitive, soul impregnated personalities, so that we are in alignment with what and who we are meant to be. And the more we can relax into that, the more we can actually enjoy life, because we stop questioning all the time, we stop doubting all the time, and even worse, we stop criticizing ourselves and judging ourselves, which really hurts us on a soul level.
yeah, that's so power. And would you say that's part of the act of remembering,
Yes,
finding our voice and
yes,
allowing our voice to have its authority or to have its space to be
yes.
heard?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And being as comfortable to say no
Yeah.
as to say, oh, okay.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, absolutely, absolutely, yeah, yeah.
So
And to be able to find the vibrancy of life within ourselves too. I remember Spirit saying many years ago, God hears joy before he hears anything else. You know, and they said, we are not here to live in acts of service. We are here to live in joy. And that is the greatest service we can give humanity, because we are part of humanity. And the more we are in that place of self, the more that affects everything around us. And a lot of us naturally move through that space into working with others, because as human beings, we connect with others and we feel that empathy and openness of working with others. But be in joy. And that doesn't mean you sit laughing all day or, you know, having a smile up to your eyes all day. But for me, it's actually that place of inner ease, to be really at ease with oneself, to be in a space of ease, and to carry that ease out into the world, to carry it out into the fields, to carry it when I sit beside a tree, when I listen to a child's laughter in a field, you know, maybe 4 fields away, to see an old couple walk down the street holding hands. You know, it's that sense of pure ease within oneself, and that ease actually is joy. That is joy.
it's wholeness, isn't it? So I think once remembered, once we have, remembered who we are whole.
Yes,
And when we're
yes.
whole, we're joyful.
Yes, and
And
separation is a political issue. I truly believe separation is a political issue that has been fostered upon us economically, religiously, and politically to keep us from
absolutely,
being all that we are. And despite that, we have broken through, and people every day are breaking through to find that sense of self within.
which is fantastic.
Yeah,
And very profound, based upon that oral tradition, which is historically feminine and so powerful because because I know when you do say in the book about history is predominantly his story, in a literal sense, but very much also the power of occupation or that power down and power over, whereas collectively as a group of women, it is power shared that we honor through those rituals and tradition. Um, if in terms of the landscape, particularly in Ireland or wherever you are in the world, how important is that land to help, like the land to help us remember?
for me, the stones are the story keepers of the earth. So when I go to another place, be it here in Ireland or I travel, for example, if I'm going to America, um, I was told maybe in the late 80s, middle 80s by Spirit that when you travel, you have to bless what you are in, whether it's a train, plane, or car. And that, again, that's our responsibility now, that we have to take care of ourselves. So as I'm leaving Ireland, I bless the plane and I put light within, light outside, light before me, light behind me, light beneath me, light above me. All is light, all is light. And I hold that and I thank the Great Mother for having held me upon the earth, and that I will be leaving her for less than a breath of her life. And as I'm coming into the States, I ask permission of the being of the States to allow me to come and to share my teachings. And then as we're coming down, I thank the elements of air, the elements of water for holding me, and I open again to the Great Mother, and I ask that she hold me as I walk upon her earth. And so then when we go to places, and I know Sally's here, Sally took me to a beautiful place, very, very powerful Native American place. And when we went to that place, immediately I stand for a moment and I feel the energies and I ask permission, always, always ask permission. I ask permission to enter this space. And what do I need to do to come into this space? You know, in Ireland, how I was taught from my granny was that you walk around it 3 times. You walk around the sacred place, whether it's a stone circle or a megalithic tomb. But you walk around, and as you walk around, you are moving from your own reality into an altered space. You're moving from looking into seeing, from listening into hearing. You're moving into their space.
into
And
that
I
inner
often think it's
space.
like the three knocks on the door, or the three, I don't know how you had it, but when I was growing up, we'd come back every year. We always had to visit the relatives. Half our
Yeah.
holiday would be visiting relatives and drinking tea and having boiled eggs and soda bread. Um,
Yeah.
but they'd always say to my mum, Hannah, will you have a cup of tea? And she'd say, oh, no, no, no. I should go on, Hannah, have a cup of tea. Oh, no, no, I couldn't. Ah, Hannah, go on, have a cup of tea. And then my mum say, oh, all right. And, and it wasn't, it was in the beginning of the 90s. Our cousin down the road, his wife had died and he remarried, and she had an Irish mother. Her father was Indian. But we went down to visit, and she said to my mum, Hannah, will you have a cup of tea? And my mum went, oh, no, 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 I couldn't. And so she never gave her a cup of tea. And on my way home, my mum's marching along like this, in her stiletto heels, because she always had to wear these stilettos. I said, Mama, what's wrong with you? She went, Jesus Christ, that woman didn't even give me a cup of tea. I said, but she asked you and you said no. And she said, yes, but she should have asked 3 times. So I always think this walking around is it's the three again, the three knocks, it's the three times. So we walk around it 3 times.
Yeah.
Sally and I did that. We walked around it 3 times asking permission. And then we stepped into their space. And when we step in, it's really, you're moving into an altered space. You're moving into an altered place, because all the memories, all the experiences, the joys, the pain, it's all there. It's in the atmosphere. It's in the very air that you are breathing. It's in the grass that's growing up between the stones, and the rocks themselves are holding the memories and the stories. And so it's a very, for me, it's always a respectful thing to do, to ask permission. And then, of course, when you leave, you always leave a gift. Now, some people, when they come on the pilgrimages with me in Ireland, they get a bit freaked when I tell them that in my tradition, how I was brought up was that you leave either some spit or some hair from the nape of your neck, or your wee. And they go, oh my God, oh, can't spit. So you see them all desperately pulling at their hair,
Yeah.
But we know now that all carries our DNA.
Yes.
You're actually leaving a part of yourself there. And
Yes.
shamanically, it means that you can journey there again anytime you want, because you've left a part of yourself there.
Absolutely. God, it's
Yeah.
amazing.
And so, it's recognizing these old ways had meanings. My
Yes. And
cousin down the road, his father, he was a farmer, but he also worked for the forestry for a while. And I remember Michael telling me that when they used to plant trees, they used to put stones and rocks broken up in with the roots. And one day somebody said, why do we do this? And they said, I don't know. So they stopped doing it. But then about 30 years ago, actually they came out the forestry and said, we need to put rocks and stones because the roots can draw out what is needed for them out of the stones and rocks. Well, the old people knew
knew
this,
that. Yeah.
but they'd just forgotten that they'd known it. And so this walking around in ritual, this way of opening oneself to the presence of what is there, is so innate that, Catholicism had to change it. So they took it and they made it the other way around, which is closing. If you open a jar, you're opening it this way.
Anti-clockwise.
But if
Yeah.
you're closing the jar, you're closing it that way. So
Yeah.
when we walk around, we go anti-clockwise around 3 times, because
Yeah.
we are opening the space. And then when we leave, we walk around and we close it again. So we never leave anything disturbed, and we never leave anything open that could be of harm to another.
And also that number three, in terms of 3 times the charm, but in terms of ancient symbols, I remember speaking to you before about the mother, maiden, and crone, those three symbols of femininity, which were superimposed, you could say, by Christianity in terms of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. So it's again power over as opposed to power shared, and another way to remove, those ancient pagan or, inherent traditions that
Yes.
were sacred and are still sacred.
Yes.
So at least, with this book, the fact that it is written and shared, that we have a way to remember. We have the
Yes.
beginning of the pathway to remember. Um, I'm just conscious of the time now, so we've got about 8 minutes left. So I want to. There's so much I could talk to you about before we get to the Q
I
and
didn't
A.
say anything about Chieltu. Did you want me to say something about
Yes, I
Chieltu?
would. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So Chieltu was a Firbolg deity, and the Firbolg were the people in Ireland before the Tuatha Danann. The Tuatha Danann were what we see as the gods and goddesses of the land. They brought with them great magic, and it was also the birthing of the Bronze Age. And the birthing of the Bronze Age in Europe happened in Ireland. We have the oldest copper mine here in Killarney, under the lower lake of Killarney. And so Tuatha Danann brought that with them, the working with metals. But before them, there was the Firbolgs. And the Firbolgs were often called either bagmen or short, dark people. And when the Tuatha came, the goddess of the Firbolg was Tieltu, and they lived at Tara. And to keep the peace, the Anu and the Dagda offered her Lou, their child, foster. And she took Lou and she breastfed Lou and cared for him and loved him. And so beloved was she by him that he actually started great games in her honor. And these were done in a place that is today called Pelltown in honor of Chieltu. And they were called the Chieltu Games. And they went on for centuries upon centuries. They were invoked again in the 1930s, but it was actually the Second World War, that stopped the games again at that time. So Tieltu is known as the Gentle Mother, and she is also the one, it's said, that brought agriculture to Ireland. So when the Firbolgs came to Ireland, it was the time when we were moving from the hunter to the gatherer.
Wow.
And it's said that Tieltu cleared the plains of Ireland, and that she actually died in clearing the plains. And so we see Tieltu as the mother, the gentle mother. She stands in the place of Lunasa, and when somebody is drawn to that place, it's often because they might have been mothering so much that they lost themselves, that they see themselves only as a mother, and that it's time to find those other aspects of themselves, the child, the wild aspect, whatever side it is. And or it could also be that they need mothering. They
Wow.
need to be held. They need to feel the sense of the mother, because there's no greater healing in the world than to be held by a mother.
Yeah.
That warmth, that love, and so Chielta brings that to us. And of course, Lunasa is the time of the harvest. So it's the first harvest in Ireland. It's the first coming of the fruits. So bringing things into fruition. So that's the gentle mother as well.
Fantastic. Um, Sorry, just in terms of, before we go into, I could listen to you all day and night and week. Before we go into the questions and answers, so if anybody has any questions, if you want to just raise your blue hand either in the reactions or in the participants, and we can have an opportunity. But before we get to that, I just want to direct people towards Amantha's Celtic Soul Journeys. It's www.celticsouljourneys.com, and Amantha will be beginning a workshop on the 13th and 14th of March. So just before Paddy's Day, for those of you of an Irish bent, might be an easier time for you to remember, the 13th and 14th of March. And details of that will be on her website, Celtic Soul Journeys. And that will be very much a grounding of what is in this book, to help people, I suppose, begin their journey to remembering in the ways of the Seabhean. So,
we're coming to the time now of Bridget. We're coming to the time of Imbolc. And we've been through a very difficult time, a very hugely changing time. And it's been horrific for some people. It's been very, very difficult to deal with for others. And at the same time, the earth has been healing. The Earth has been healing at an extraordinary rate. Scientists said they thought it would take over 30 years for it to heal as quickly as it has in the last 12 months. And I do feel that's something we should be aware of. And as we're moving into Imbolc, I would ask all of you to perhaps reflect on anything that you can be grateful for from 2020. Anything that you can have gratitude for. Because for a lot of people, it's pushed them in, it's pushed them down. And for many people, they were running. They were on this rat race. They were going, waking up, thinking about something, having to do the food, or doing the food and thinking about having to get out of the house, getting out of the house and having to think if they turn the cooker off, what they're going to put on the table that evening, whatever it is. It's like the brain was going like this all the time. And we've had a very quiet time, a very insular time, a time when we've had to be very conscious on different levels. And in many places, in many spaces, a lot of people have come out to assist and help each other, not just on a community level or family level, but it's even happened on a country level. When I saw the first plane of doctors flying into Italy from Cuba to assist, my heart just broke open. I thought, would we ever see this day? Did we ever think we'd see this day? When they were coming from this country to that, And it's like, yes, it's really difficult. And there are things we can take forward and be grateful for. And as we're coming to Imbolc is the seeds. So what is it we want to clear out of our lives, out of our consciousness? What are we carrying? What pain are we holding, perhaps, that it's time to let go of? Because Bridget is the midwife and healer. She's also the patroness of the arts, and that isn't just the arts as in jewelry making, metal work, etc., but the arts, the old arts, were the arts of scrying, of seeing within and seeing beyond. And she keeps us in our heart. The Bridget flame, the flame lies in our heart. So she's there in our hearts. She can assist us to let go of what perhaps we've been holding, or what we're holding, or fears that we have. And in letting go, give ourselves some time to reflect and feel into what seeds do we want to put down for the future? What do we want to bring into our lives? What do we want to cultivate? Because when we put seeds into the earth, we don't just throw them down and then walk off. We take care of those seeds. We water them, we put fertilizer down. If it looks a little weak, we'll put a stick, or we'll put something around it if there's strong winds. We cultivate what is growing. So what is it we want to put down to see grow, and how can we cultivate it for the year? This is the time. This is the best time to do it on the turning of our wheel. This is the time of Imbolc, the time of birth, the time of beginnings, the time of seeding. And I feel like, we have gone through such changes, and I know there's more to come, but we are in a very different space to what we were, say, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5 months ago. We've all shifted, we've all moved one way or another. And what is it we want to carry forward? What is it we want to let go of? What can we be grateful for? And what can we be open to attract into our lives? What is it we want to see growing now, to cultivate now for our future? And not just for us, but for the earth. Because this is her time. The earth has been through such changes, such shifts. The old earth is dying and the new earth is being reborn, and it's all the indigenous people of the world will tell you that. And so dreaming the world awake, dreaming an earth that we would like to live on, and dreaming an earth that we want to leave for our children's 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 children. I remember in my very early 30s, Spirit said, "You are the seeds of the seeds, and what grows from you is none of your business." At the time, I thought that was a very strange thing to say, but I really understand it now, because my dream for the earth and with the earth, I will never see in my lifetime. And my children will probably never see it. And my grandchildren might see it, and their children will see it. And I have 3 grandchildren that are adults, and they're all dreaming this dream. How do we want to see the earth? How do we want to see the peoples of the earth? How do we want to see all living upon the earth, working and living together with harm to none, each taking only that which is necessary for their survival, only that which is necessary. The elders taken care of and loved, their stories heard again and again and again, because one of the roles of the elders is to tell their story before they die, because when they've gone, their stories have gone with them. They have been through things we will never know. Never. I remember my father saying to Joanna, my eldest, when she was about 4, he said, "We were young, we lived in a box. We lived in a cardboard box." "When you did not, Grandad." "Actually, we did. We lived in a cardboard box," he said, "and we had no shoes." "No, Grandad, I can't believe it." And it was true that they had no shoes. They all went to school with no shoes. It was common. My mother grew up with no shoes. And then he said to her, "And we had no television." And she went, "Well, Grandad, I can believe you lived in a cardboard box. I can believe you didn't have shoes, but I can't believe you didn't have a television." The realities of the day. So when you hear an elder in your family sharing a story, record it. Record it, it's sacred. And they're sharing something with you that is sacred to them. This is why they repeat these stories. This is part of who you are. This is part of your blood. This is what will help you to remember who you are. And one day you might be asked about this. My grandchildren, when they were young, growing up, I used to have them in the summers for 3 weeks, sometimes 4 weeks to myself, which was great, you know. But they would ask me stories, and they would say, "And what was Mummy like when she was young? And, you know, what was it like for you?" And things that my own children never asked. And now when their children come along, they'll be asking these things too. And who was Grandad, that mad woman, you know, that did that work? It'll all be coming out, but it's wonderful. It's wonderful because it opens up, it fires the imagination. And we don't want the imagination to die because it is magic. It's magic nation. It's part of our dreaming time. It's part of our creativity. And so we're dreaming for ourselves, but most importantly right now, I would ask you to dream for the earth. I'd ask you to be part of being this new earth, to midwife the dream of the earth, to midwife peace, connectedness, kindness, sharing and caring, growth and fulfillment. I really feel that's what we're needing right now. Yeah. And on my YouTube, if you go to it, there is a dream called the Earth Dreams. It's a dream that I've been dreaming since the end of the 90s, I suppose 96, 97. And I have shared it with hundreds of people in workshops, hundreds upon hundreds. I have shared this dream. And I used to dream it every night before I went to sleep. For over 12 years, I dreamed it every night. And so I actually put it down on tape a few months ago. And Elaine, a dear friend, put some pictures behind it. All of Ireland, of course. And then my son Kieran put a bit of music behind, so it looks very professional. It looks very good, you know. But it is the Earth's dream. It's the dream of the Earth, and people all over the world are dreaming this. All the Indigenous people are dreaming this. You know, we're not just here for us. We are here right now because we are meant to be here right now. Our souls knew that we were meant to be here right now, to be part of this new beginning, to be part of this new awakening, to be part of this rebirth of the earth, and how we can work with her, how we can remember her, how we can live with her, for she feeds us. She waters us. She houses us. She gives us so much beauty. And for us to just, even a few minutes each day, remember her. And remember that when you walk upon the earth, let each step be a prayer for her, a connection back into your mother. Because quite literally, you are born from the womb and you return to the tomb. Our bodies will return to her one way or another. One way or another. And what comes from those bodies as they break down, or the ashes, that'll go into the ecostructure of the earth itself, become part of the flowers, the fruit, the vegetables, the grass that is ate by the cattle, the colour of the flowers and the fragrance, the song of the birds. Our ancestors are there with us all the time. It's a continual cycle.
So we can remember.
Yeah. So that's what I
We
wanted
could
to
make
say.
that, and that was beautiful, poetic, but very profound. Um, I guess we could really make, a conscious effort, based upon the brief conversation we've had tonight, uh, to try to take a moment in each day to come as we are entering into the time of Imbolic and Bridget, to remember who we are, to remember that we are connected, um, and to remember that there's a greater and higher purpose for all of us, but that we all have a role to play in it, that we have a voice in that oral tradition, which we need to engage in the act of remembering.
Yes.
So powerful. So, with that in mind, we have make your way to Amantha's YouTube channel for the videos there. Also, have a look at her website, www.celticsouljourneyswithay.com. Okay, and you'll find the details there of the precursor to the workshop for the Way of the Seabhean, and hopefully you will all be able to purchase the book as well, because it is absolutely phenomenal. A very easy read, and ironically enough, I have to say, Amantha, when I was reading it, it is uh, there's an act of remembering that's ongoing, because you realize how much of it is innate, that's there. And certainly when I mean, born and raised on the east coast of Ireland, when I journey westward, particularly to Kerry or to Clare, um, something very profound happens to me, as you know, from going down to Kerry. And there is a movement there, there's a spiritual homecoming. And I'm sure wherever you live in the world, there are those sacred spaces for you too. Would like all of you, from the bottom of my heart, and certainly with a sense of love and compassion, to take on board first and foremost what Amantha has suggested as we approach the time of Bridget and the time of Embolic, to plant those seeds for the future, to remember what we're letting go of, and to honour what we are about to create. It's been an absolute honour and a privilege to share space and time with you. If I could ask you all just to raise some virtual hands to as a round of applause, for Amantha, for sharing
Thank
this
you.
space and allowing us in this brief moment to remember that we are part of something greater and something very powerful. And please, buy the book. It's fantastic, and register for one of her workshops. Yeah, you won't be disappointed. So thank you, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Hopefully, you'll join us next week for our next conversation, which will be with Claire Larkin on